I haven't spent any time studying the neck wound or this issue. I know David has, but so far I've been in such a brief time. I've just been looking at the cranial wounds.
Yeah, I actually that's some of the things that I wanted to, and actually I wanted to speak with you to validate some of them, especially the appearance of the brain at the autopsy, because and I've been quoted before, and I actually did say, I told Lifton that I felt like the brain was had some unusual characteristics, and it seemed to be too small for the cranial cavity. First, it didn't really look. It kind of the sulci were larger and they were flat and more of a whitish smooth color as opposed to the grayish.
The photographs I saw, the brain looked like it had been sitting, or it was sort of deformed, a little bit compressed and twisted, like we would see, with brains that had been sitting in a formaldehyde jar for a long period of time. Right. It was twisted. That's what I noticed about it. As far as the size of the brain, I don't remember if I had any particular thoughts about it, but it was a deformed shape.
Well, when it was taken, when Humes handed it to Boswell, and we went over, my first impression was, it really, first of all, the damage to the brain didn't seem to correlate well with the damage to the skull, really. And then the appearance of the brain was as I told you, it seemed like that it seemed like it had actually flattened out, in the side, how normally they're.
I agree. I do remember that part. And parts of it were flattened.
Yeah, and that what we saw was basically little or no damage to this portion of the brain, the basic portion, and.
So, are you referring to the brain dissection that was done afterward? Which day was this dissection done?
I don't know.
Yeah.
See, this is what I see. I didn't see the brain after the autopsy at all.
Well, tell us exactly what the brain looked like when you were handed the brain.
Well, when I put the brain in the sling, of course, Boswell had already turned it upside down and gave it to me, and I was kind of on my knees and put it in the sling. I was looking for the internal carotids, because normally what we would do, and we did this with all autopsies, we take the internal carotids, thread the needles into tie off the needles, and then open the little clip to the tube and allow the formula to infuse the brain. And there was really no set time that we did that. Usually at the end of the autopsy, what we would do is, before we left the morgue, we would take the brain, take the needles out and drop it into the bucket, which also had formalin. And we put the cap, it was a stainless steel, I don't know, probably 2.5 gallon bucket, and it had a stainless steel lid that went on. And it would have a piece of tape that had the autopsy number and the patient's name. If it was from Bethesda, it would have the hospital number and so forth. The information to match the toe tag, and we used a toe tag, and we also used a tag at the elbow. And we would pick it up, take it around the corner, put it in the brain room, And then they would accumulate all of the brains for that week. They would do the sectioning of the brain with the residents on Monday. And so the difference with that was that, when the autopsy was completed, the brain bucket had been, was gone. And of course that was, again, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when I noticed that. And I really didn't think much of that. I didn't know if Paul had picked it up, put it in there, or whatever. Hume says that he actually took it with him. I don't specifically remember that. But I had, I made some statements, and it was kind of a fleeting thing that went through my mind as I first saw the brain. Was, it looked like a female brain. It was small, so forth. And it was abnormal to me because I had never seen a brain that we had taken at autopsy that the sulci were flat like that. A brain really has some texture and so forth to the top, but they were kind of flat, shiny, and it was tori were a little extended. I mean, they were a little wider than normal. And then I never thought about it being a fixed brain until you brought it up. And that was the primary reason I wanted to discuss it with you, Matt, because I've been ridiculed, chastised, because I'm the first to admit, and as I admitted to both Livingstone and Lifton, I did not, I don't know of any scientific reasons that there are differences between the appearance of male and female brains. I mean, I'm not that versed on it, so.
You really can't tell.
Yeah, I didn't think so either.
Just from the gross appearance.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the brain you saw right at the time of the autopsy that was laying next to his body?
No, it wasn't.
Where was
Actually,
it?
Hume's and Fink were the primary examiners on the head area. I was at Fink's right shoulder, across actually at the president's left side. Dr. Boswell was across the table from me. Dr. Humes was at his right shoulder, and they were at the head of the table, and they were examining the brain and so forth, and I was watching them at that time. And then there was a time when I wasn't attentive to what they were doing, because at that time Dr. Boswell, I was assistant Dr. Boswell. We were doing the Y incision, removing the organs and so forth. But after that, and my memory on the time that we took the brain and then in the testimony, Dr. Humes' testimony, I remember the brain being taken after Dr. Boswell and I finished with the organs.
I think you're describing what I saw. You remember that, David, with a sort of flattened appearance of the sulci over the
I
left
saw this
hemisphere.
over 20 years ago, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't rely on my memory anymore.
I,
There's nothing in the public record to remind me.
Yeah, what I saw was, it was a deformed brain. The sulci over the left hemisphere were sort of flattened.
Right.
And appearance like it'd been laying in a jar for a period of time. It's not what you would see, and I participated in multiple autopsies as a morgue attendant, and then later we did brain cutting every month for years when I was on staff and as a resident. edema, cerebral edema, takes a period of time to develop, hours, and you would have not seen edema develop in a short time. I mean, his blood pressure bottomed out, so his soul size should have been normal over that left hemisphere. Actually, you see on that x-ray, you see there's a shadow, an air shadow, because the brain had relaxed. It was sort of sunken in on the left hemisphere. So what you're describing is exactly what I saw on the photograph that's at the archives with that flattened appearance.
Well, that lends a lot of credence to the fact is that was not the original brain. And the way and what I base that on is that, and as the brain was being removed, as Dr. Humes was removing it, he made a statement, basically, I assumed to himself at that point in time, but loud enough that you know, I could hear it. And of course, I was right there at him, so and he said, you know, basically what he said was, well, the damn thing fell out of my hand. And he removed the brain, handed it to Dr. Boswell. The other thing that I noticed that whenever Dr. Boswell gave me the brain, I laid it, he actually gave me the brain with the basal portion up, and I laid it in the gauze. I noticed that the brain stem where it had been severed, you know, and at that time I assumed by Dr. Humes that it was a little strange, and the fact is that it was actually cut the way it was cut, and you had to look kind of carefully, but it was cut like it had been cut from this side at this level, and the cut had been completed from this side at a slightly different elevation. And the other thing I noticed was that the carotids, which normally, you know, because it's actually an artery, it's elastic and it retracts a little, which you expect. But these were really retracted. They were almost, to use the term, they were almost shriveled. And I was having a lot of problem threading the needle out into it without going through the side of it. And Dr. Carney, I believe his name was, I only knew who he was as one of the residents, and he apparently was a senior resident in pathology there. But he came in and he was working with us, and eventually we did get needles into the vessel. But the whole circle there, I guess the circle with this, whatever, the basal arteries and so forth, they looked like the texture of the vessels was, it looked like they had a surface graininess to them.
The only thing I remember about the vessels was, look at what I just remember seeing the basilar and the
Right.
tebrals, tortuous, a little bit tortuous, which is normal. They did not,
Yeah.
they were just appeared very, they were thin. I didn't see any areas of regular calcification that you would see. That's about all I remember about that.
You said normal calcification.
Well, calcification you would see associated with atherosclerosis, fatty
Right.
plaque. I don't remember seeing anything that looked like that. It looked like a young vessels, vessels from a young person. For what it's worth, I know that his cholesterol was over 300.
So you said it looked like the vessels of a young person.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just didn't see anything. You really can't tell about plaque until you section the vessels, but on the external surface you can see signs of calcification and nodular irregularities, and I did not see anything.
Is it normal as you age to have?
You start getting that, depending on multiple factors, primarily your cholesterol and hypertension. You know, it's, I'm not sure what it means, but it did not look like the vessels of anyone that had any significant vascular disease.
Would you suspect somebody of his age, and given the fact that his cholesterol was high, there should be some there?
Well, I think he was fairly young. Was he 46 when he died? But with his cholesterol being as high as I saw, I think it was 340, 350 range. I would have expected to see some mild changes. Of course, you really can't tell without sectioning the vessels, and I don't know if the vessels were ever sectioning.
I don't think that particular brain was ever really sectioned.
Okay.
If you read through the literature, it seems like there was a brain that Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell and Stringer attended. And then there was another brain and that one was sectioned with coronal sections. And because Stringer said that as they sectioned it, he took pictures of the sections. There is another testimony that says that there was a brain conference, and these don't really correlate time-wise. Later on, where Dr. Fink was present, and at that time, Dr. Fink had requested that one of the neuropathologists be present. Humes nixed that, and they did the section. They didn't really do coronal sections, which was the standard there. They just did a cursory type examination of that brain. Following the testimony from the Warren Commission, the medical testimony from the Warren Commission through to the review board, you begin to pick up some of those discrepancies. Now, I also admit that it was easier for me because it wasn't what I observed or what I participated in. And so I picked up on various aspects and followed it through. I've always been asked, the thing I've always asked, was it the president's brain? Honestly, I have to say, I don't really know. But the first really indication that I had that there was significant evidence that it wasn't is when William had talked to you.
Okay.
And then, because I have never been able to rationalize the appearance of the brain.
Yeah.
And now I feel like that
Okay.
I have, that there is collaborative evidence that the brain was not what it was supposed to be. So it's not
One thing I wanted to ask you about, on the view of the inferior surface, seems like it was, I can't remember exactly how it was oriented, if it was tilted. I think it was tilted to 1 degree, but on the outer edge of the lateral edge of the left hemisphere, the membranes were disrupted in a line, which I would, when you do use the saw to remove the brain, the skull cap, you often have a little bit of disruption of membrane in arachnoid and veal membranes. So that was on the left side. That it was not a continuous line, but it was the line was extend a little bit, the gap extend a little bit. And I tried to look on the right side, and I didn't see it on the right side. The way it was tilted a little bit, it could have been inserted underneath the area that was visible.
The only thing we used striker saw that night for was to remove the rib cage. There was no, actually at the time they were working on the brain, the striker saw wasn't available at the table.
Really? And you were there the entire time?
Yes, I was at that table with the exception of no more than 5 or 10 minutes. Dr. Stover, Captain Stover was sitting behind me in a chair. He had on scrubs and he was sitting cross-legged on the chair. And he told me that they had just brought in sandwiches and he was back in the room where the lockers were. He said, "Go have a sandwich," because it was, I don't know, it's probably close to midnight. I'm not sure when. I've been there a long time. So I walked back, opened washed my hands, took the gloves off, washed my hands, and picked up a sandwich, opened it up, took a bite of it. It was, I think it was either pimento and cheese or tuna, and I don't eat tuna. So anyway, and I really wasn't hungry. I placed the sandwich in a trash can and walked back to the table. As I walked back to the table, Dr. Oswald asked me to hold something. I don't remember exactly what we were doing at that time, but we continued with the autopsy. That was after we had put the brain into infuse. As we were, we went to the bucket. Dr. Humes and Dr. Fink kept working with the head, and I think that was when some of the photographs, I think Stringer was in there at that time. After the main photographs of the beginning of the autopsy, Stringer was called in, and he was kind of in and out during the autopsy itself, and because they would call him in to take a photograph and such, and the photograph of the inside of the cranium was there. There were no more x-rays taken later on in the autopsy. Most of the primary portion of the x-rays were taken at the beginning, or before the autopsy actually, the first cuts began. And there were several sets of x-rays. Custer and the student who was assisting him came in first.
That would be Reed.
Reed, okay. Yeah, he came in, they came in first. Dr. Humes was directing the x-rays. At least I assume he thought he was. But all we were doing were routine, AP, lateral, oblique, that type of thing.
I have a question about.
May I interject a question?
Sure.
Did you see the dura severed from the brain by Humes while you were watching?
No, I didn't actually see that.
Would that have been a normal procedure?
Well, yeah, certainly, because, it would have probably been severed at the time the skull cap was taken off.
Right.
Normally.
But
What about the
you were
falls?
there during that procedure and that never happened?
No. The way that the brain was removed was that the fracture lines that were, basically from the coronal suture back, was, there were fracture lines, and later they said that when they looked in the cranium, I did not see that there were fracture lines in the frontal also, but it was taken out in what What they actually did was they extended some of the coronal lines here. There had already been an extension of the fractures in here, and they actually kind of opened it up, and they took the brain out kind of from the side. Now, I would assume that probably the dura was probably the separation at, you know, as the brain was moved around in the cranium. I didn't really see any gigantic tears in it or where it had been ripped from the skull.
Did they have to, you know, the falx, did they have to cut the falx with a scalpel to remove?
I don't really think so. I think that basically what, like Hume says, it practically fell out of my hands.
Okay.
I'm not that versed on what trauma does to the brain, but I mean, a gunshot wound type thing. But I assume that from the damage to the skull, you know, it kind of goes in and expands. And so, now, the other thing with the brain was that the damage to the brain, you know, in Dallas I talked to Dr. McClellan and some of the other physicians there. They said that there was a large portion of the brain missing. The brain that we had that we infused, the damage to the brain was approximately in the temporal, parietal, occipital area, but it wasn't as if it had been blown out or there was a large amount of it missing. There was some missing. The primary damage, it looked like it had been traumatized from pressure or a blow or something, you know, where the brain, because the brain is so much fluid, and the experience with the brains that I've seen is that when you have that type of contusion or something in the brain, it kind of, I say that it kind of jellifies, or, you know, looks kind of jelly type. And this brain looked that way. Actually had pretty much the anterior portion of the posterior portion of the brain from a little behind the coronal suture all the way back looked that way. There was no, I mean, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like the photograph depicts where it's actually grooved through and, you know, that type of thing.
You mean the itodox drawing? Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah.
Was there any damage on the left side of the brain?
I didn't see any. I didn't see any damage on the left side of the brain. As we turned the brain over, of course, you know, you could see some of the damage on the area here extending a little bit in there. I would say the uncus, you know, of the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't go much further toward the brain stemmers than that area, but you could actually see it wasn't really in the area of the uncus. It was a little, a very small portion of that was there.
What was, tell me again about the uncus, what was?
It's just
I mean, was it compressing the midbrain? Was it swollen, or was it indented?
It really wasn't swollen so much as if it was pressed. You know, if it had been, you know.
Yeah, it's normally a just sort of
Yeah,
roundish
right.
structure, so it looked more flattened.
Yeah, it looked like the beginning of it was involved in the jelly, but it wasn't really. It didn't encompass that much of the underside of the brain.
And what was the condition of the right cerebellum?
whole cerebellum looked like it was intact. And, you know, the cerebellum has a, well, I don't tell you what it has. It had, you know, there was no real tear in the heavy membrane that it kind of protects and rests in. And that was another question that I had whenever I looked at the photograph that was supposed to be the inferior side of the brain. I saw a slight amount of damage in that area on that photograph. Nothing really dramatic or anything.
Which photograph was this?
The one, there's a photograph of the
Talking about the doc's drawing?
no, I don't know if it's the doc's drawing or not. It was the one that the Stringer said that he did not take. He didn't take.
Well, he said he didn't take a bunch of them.
Yeah, well, he said he didn't take any photographs of the inferior portion of the brain. But there is a picture or a drawing or something that.
There's only one that I know of.
I think it's an illustration, I think.
Okay.
From
And-
docs.
Sketch.
And the brain photograph I saw, the archives, David saw just a little portion of the, let's see, I believe it was left cerebellum, inferior portion, was just a tiny bit torn, and it looked like a handling type thing that, you know, cerebellar tissue is so fragile, it looked like it had been handled and just a little bit torn loose, but it wasn't completely lacerated.
Yeah.
Is that what you remember?
Yeah, I wouldn't rely on my memory at this.
So how do we
stage.
correlate that with the descriptions of the Dallas
Right.
doctors
Well-
who went as far as to say that the
Right.
cerebellum was literally dripping onto the cart, oozing onto the cart?
Let's go back to James's presence in the morgue. You were asked to leave the morgue during the taking of the x-rays, weren't you?
I know, I insisted with x-rays.
You what? You
I-
assisted?
yeah,
You were there during the x-rays?
Yeah, I was given
All right,
a
were
lead
you,
apron.
were you ever absent from the morgue after the shipping casket arrived?
No,
You were there all the time?
all the time. When the body was removed, it was, and this is a memory that I was at the front table, and when I say front table, the one that we did the autopsy on. The table 1 and 2, and other people label them differently, but the cold room or the anteroom was actually the outside wall of the hospital at the loading dock, so I considered that the back of the morgue. But I was at the front table, and basically at the front table waiting for the body to get there. And my memory is that it was pushed to the front table on the gurney. We slid it off, put it on the table. Dr. Boswell said, now thank you to the other people that had come in with the body, and asked them to leave. As they were leaving, he left. He came back about, I guess, about 15 minutes later. I assumed they had gone up to pathology to talk with, to actually form a plan.
Was Hume still in the morgue
No,
while he was
no,
gone?
the only people in the morgue at that point in time were Paul and I. And the body was still wrapped on the table. And, there was no way anyone else could get in unless we let them in. No, I assumed that Hume's then had a key to the morgue, but as the morgue was set up, as you left the morgue, the door's locked. And you couldn't come back in without a key or someone inside letting you in. And that was the procedure the whole time I was there, because every time we were on duty, they had to call us in order to bring a body for us to get.
Let's talk about the taking of the x-rays.
Okay.
We talked yesterday about the metal brace or metal support behind JFK's head, which you did not recognize.
We did not we did not use that. I'm not even sure that that particular table had, had a aperture for it to fit into. The whole 18 months that I was there, I never saw anything like that.
And we don't see that metal brace in the X-ray films, which
Well,
we definitely should see if it was
yeah.
there. So the question is, did you remove the metal brace before the X-rays were taken so that it wouldn't obscure the X-rays?
The metal brace wasn't there.
Yeah.
And
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and what we used was what we've described it as a chalk. It actually was, it was a four-sided block with prongs that came out where we could adjust it to the size of the patient. And we would not have placed it under the head. We would have placed it at the neck area.
The neck. Right, so we have a real problem here. The X-rays do not show the metal brace, either the anterior or lateral X-rays, which would be very obvious if it were there.
Yeah.
It's not there, and yet we see it in the photograph. So this is a huge paradox.
Well, there's there's even more to the paradox, and the fact is that the photographs, as they were taken, they're little subtle things that appear that I have no memory of there. The telephone on the wall is one that stands out to me because the thing that impressed me about the other phone was the size of the cord. It was long, curly cord, and you could reach anywhere in the morgue with it. That was the only phone that we had, that I remember we had. And if we had had one directly on the wall there, certainly I would have been aware of it. The other thing was that in one of the photographs, there is a structure that looks like it's placed at the end of the gallery. Custer says it was an X-ray machine. If you stretch your imagination, you can probably put some retractable wheels there, but they're not obvious. To me, it looked like well, my first impression was that it was an animal cage. That kind of led me to speculate that the photographs may have been taken at the research center, because they did have an animal morgue there. And
This was within Bethesda, Naval Hospital.
across the street in the back, over to close to the barracks.
Okay.
In there. The reason I came up with that is that as a student, of course, we were pulled to do all kinds of little scut work. And one of the things that I was called to do was the lady who was a second-class hospital corpsman that took care of our rabbits. We did TPIs at that time. And we raised our own syphilis rabbits, and we harvested them. And she maintained that, and the guinea pigs we used for the guinea pig heart antigens, and for our contests and so forth. But she was going on leave, and then so they distributed her duties to us, to my class, and I had to go in, and in order to get to the animal, to the rabbit, where the rabbits were being kept to feed them, I had to go through the corner of that morgue. I remember it fairly vividly because they had an experiment going on at that point in time where they had a German Shepherd that was submerged in a glass, or I guess it was a glass tank at that point in time. And, they were feeding the oxygen, him oxygen and so forth. They were actually feeding him solution that he could breathe that was saturated with oxygen, and he looked pretty bad because he'd been submerged in the water for so long, and his hair was coming out, so forth. But he was still viable and so forth. And
Was there an exam table inside that room?
there was an autopsy table.
There was an autopsy table there.
And there was a small, vaguely as I remember, there was a small gallery area there, not like in the main lab, so forth. But as I went through, I really didn't notice too much because, the lights weren't on and that type of thing. It was just kind of going from one door to the next door, and everything was to the right. So I didn't really take that much notice of what was there. Quite frankly, I was a little upset that I had to do that, but anyway. And that's the reason that when I saw the photographs, that particular morgue came to mind as a possible place that things could have occurred. The autopsy itself was, again, unusual as far as our protocols and so forth. But when I talked to Dr. McClellan, and primarily I spent more time with Dr. McClellan than the other two people, which I just was introduced to. The wounds and the description of the brain as seen, mass, were so dramatically different from what I saw at the autopsy.
Why don't you tell us what you did see at the autopsy, especially the back of the head?
The back of the head there's a photograph that can give you an idea of what the back of the head looked like, but I don't think it's valid because I saw no damage across the sagittal line as it goes on the left. And that photograph actually kind of centers the sagittal line. But
So for the camera and for people that may at some point see this, show me on your head where the sagittal line is so that the lay audience.
sagittal suture. Yeah, it's the line.
It's the line in the middle of the skull?
Yeah, very much.
Where did you see a hole?
The hole was actually in this area. It encompassed mostly parietal, occipital, maybe some temporal.
Okay.
I wonder if it would be useful if one of us would be a model for the camera.
I, in preparation for this, I was in a Walgreens and they had Halloween, they had skulls. And I was looking at the skulls, and actually anatomically they were fairly close to where the coronal sutures and so forth were, and you could take it. And I meant to go back and get one, and by the time I went back, they'd done away with Halloween.
Well, we could use Mike as a model.
Yeah.
His chair moves a little easier than mine.
Okay.
Let's see.
For the sake of the
I guess for
camera.
the camera. I'll sit like this, and you can. Kind of
Okay.
cover the area that you saw.
My, yeah.
Let me do this.
Okay.
Okay, the area that I saw was starting approximately at this.
You might need to move a little more to the left or left.
Okay. Started here, it extended down,
Yeah,
over, and to this area.
that's very
Now,
helpful. Do that once more for the
Okay.
camera.
Again, approximately here, it came down and over, I guess maybe a little bit forward here,
Yeah.
and then came back. But
And also indicate where you thought there was a bullet entry hole near the ear.
okay, what, at the beginning, Dr. Fink and Dr. Hume says they unwrapped the head. They started examining, and they found a puncture wound just about in this area here.
I'm not sure if the camera's gonna be able to get that. Turn your
Okay.
head, yeah, there you go, try it now.
It would be above the ear and slightly forward, which would be
Yes.
right in this area here.
Very good.
And they examined it. It was, I would say, roughly 2 to 4 millimeters, maybe 5, that type. And it had a graying on this border and this border. And Dr. Fink had, he had said, well, maybe that is from a bullet. Well, when they began to discuss that, Dr. Humes was called to the gallery. He was talking to, at that time, I saw it, he was just an admiral, but he actually was, and later I was told it was Dr. Berkeley. And then they had a discussion.
Oh, Berkeley was in the gallery?
Yes, they had a discussion, and then Humes came back to the table and went directly back to the head. And then called him, look at this or something like that. And then they went to that. They never returned to the wound here. And, as I said, people have asked me who was in charge of autopsy. Humes was constantly being called to discussion with Berkeley. And as the night progressed, the tension increased as they discussed. And it was such that, I know I felt it at the table, and it seemed to permeate all of us there.
Were there comments from others in the gallery besides Berkeley?
No, it was pretty much Berkeley. The people in the gallery that I remember was on the end of the gallery on my left was Admiral Galloway. There were 2 flag officers, which were generals, and then Berkeley. And when Humes was called from the table, they had to go from the head of the table down to where Berkeley was, discuss with Berkeley, come back, and that was it was more than an incident. It was numerous times. And
Thinking about Curtis LeMay again, do you recall personally whether there was cigar smoke?
I was a pipe smoker, and I also smoked cigars again. I did not smell any cigar smoke.
Do you remember the episode of Humes asking O'Connor to have the guy stop smoking?
I don't know. Paul, I know Paul was in the morgue. Paul would leave the morgue and go and do things. Paul left and went to get the sound that I was talking to because they were afraid they were going to create a false one with the probe that we had, which was a standard metal probe. It was, very narrow and kind of flat.
He said to me he had to go get the plaster of Paris
Yeah,
to reshape the head at one point.
And I think that he also was the one that got the rubber dam.
The rubber dam, was it very thin?
It was like the ones that your dentist put on your teeth. Sometimes, when they're doing
Yes.
surgery and so forth, they take a rubber dam and they
Yeah, okay.
put it. It was similar to that.
How big was it?
If I remember correctly, it probably was maybe 2 to 3 inches.
Did they have to cut out a section to fit in there?
No,
No.
They just laid the section over the plaster of Paris and then brought the skull, fitted the skull back, and then stretched the scalp as much as they possibly could.
After they had stretched the scalp as much as they could, was it all close?
No, there was probably, I would say maybe a centimeter left, but
That was in the right rear.
that was here, in this area, basically the same area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what they did was because Kennedy, the way that he wore his hair, it was fairly long on top, even though it was manicured. You know, he had sideburns and in the back, his hair was, I can't remember what they call it, but anyway, it was here, and then when the hair was brought up, and you know, after it was washed and cleaned and so forth, the scalp was brought up, just tied together, you know, sutured, and then they combed the hair over him, and once that was done, we moved him from the front table to, and the body was washed, and we moved him to the front table, and because the front table was dry, and the body was dried, placed in, they did the cosmetics there, and someone brought in the clothing that we put on him. We dressed him fully. We, you know, from the undergarments, we even put socks, used his, which would be kind of unusual for me, but.
The washing you're talking about occurred after the autopsy had been completed, right?
Oh, yeah, all of this, the washing, the embalmment.
Just to clarify.
As they embalmed him, they washed him, actually put, you know, closed the Y suture. They put in the plaster, they used the intestines, they cut the intestines and put them back in and for moisturize. And then sewed the Y incision. And then, you know, they worked on the head, closed the wound in the head, and cleaned the body. They washed the body, washed the hair, and then he was dry. We moved him to the other table, and then they did the cosmetics. Now, as they were doing the cosmetics, the right eyelid would not stay closed naturally. It was just a little bit. So they put a suture underneath the eyelid and pulled it out.
Remember how much the eye was bulging initially? You don't remember?
I don't see, you know, of course, like I said, I really didn't specifically pay attention to that. But I think if the eyes were bulging, I would have noticed that.
I saw it on one x-ray. The other thing was the sunken right forehead. You remember they had to, how they made that look more normal? Did they had to reposition that right frontal bone?
Not that I'm aware of. I didn't see the morticians actually do any more than fill the cavity. And now that that may have occurred when they were shaping. You know, after the plaster of Paris, then it went in, and they shaped. Because the skull was fractured at a point in time. It was kind of, you know, you could kind of move, you know, the areas, especially from the coronal suture back on the right side. You could move the thing through the hair and the scalp.
Let's switch for a moment to the single bullet theory. In view of your recollection of where the neck wound was and where the back wound was, did the single bullet theory make sense to you once you heard about it?
It's not possible. And for two things. After we removed the the organs, put them on the cutting table. And Dr. Boswell was dissecting out the heart, that type of stuff, and doing the sections of the heart that we normally did. As we opened it up, there was a question to the gallery. Did he smoke? And it was because the lungs were so clear. They were, kind of pink and that type of thing. That was unusual when we did autopsies because everybody knows they smoke. And we used to take guesses as to what type of cigarette they smoked. Because on sections, you could see the micronite filters and, those type of things. And the lungs would be, they would be kind of purpley, blotchy, that type of stuff. We very rarely, unless it was a child or a woman or a female that didn't smoke, it was young, never see them in lungs like that. And Boswell asked, did he smoke? The answer was he occasionally smoked a cigar. The other thing that was striking about that was the fact is that there was very little fluid or blood other than what we expected from the autopsy removal in the pleural cavity at all. And as I was there, Dr. Boswell was across the way doing the sections, and he was measuring, and I was writing and so forth, and I looked down, and they had lifted the president's head and back at about a 45-degree angle, and I could see right down into the chest cavity, and I could see them probing the back one, and I could see the path of the back one, and it was going actually down behind the rib cage. But as it went down behind the rib cage, you could still see an indentation in the floor that followed it. And then when Dr. Humes probed it with his finger, you could, of course, really see that indentation. And I saw it on the impression on the pleural lining, the floor there. And it went actually down toward the feet area, approximately. I don't know, I would have to guess the angle would have been somewhere between 60 and 90 degrees. And it ended right there. They never could find any other path that it went into. And the path was definitely not straight ahead or at a 10 or 15 or 20 degree angle. Now, the other thing about it was that even if it had gone straight through, it would have come out, it probably would have come out close to the end of the clavicle. It would not have, the description of the wound is a little deceptive in the fact that they say it was above the scapula. It was right at the upper end of the scapula, between the scapula and the spine. And it would have, in order to exit it here, it would have had to have gone upward at an angle.
Now, you said that there was also a contusion at the upper portion of the right middle lobe.
That was where I saw
How do
it.
you explain that?
That was about where the depth of the probing, when they were probing, it was about at the depth of the end of the passage. And I had just assumed that the bullet had gone in. And when it actually went through the intercostal, the force went through the intercostal, and it caused a slight contusion. And it wasn't I mean, it wasn't a real obvious contusion type thing that you would expect. It was more of a reddening. To me, it was kind of brown, but that's
Now,
my red green.
We've got a lot of this information already, so I need to get to what, Mike, what you saw and what your opinions are in when you saw the photographs and exhibits when you went into the archives. Tell us about that.
Okay. First, I wanted to ask about one of the x-rays. You know, they, can't remember if it was Custer or Reed, said they could not lower the x-ray machine low enough between the autopsy table and the gallery to get it down low enough to get the entire left
That was Custer.
side. Was it Custer? The entire, was that, what do you remember about the space between the table and the gallery?
The x-ray machine and, you know, the x-ray machine that we had in the morgue was there almost all the time, was an old Army field unit.
Mhm.
You know, it had the cone and, you know.
Custer said it was something called a PACO unit.
No, I don't know if that was that, but what I remember is, and the reason I remember that is that later on in my business, we put those in doctors' offices because they were cheap, easy to come by. But they were Army, almost an Army type of green type thing, and they were fairly large, really. They, you know, they were kind of awkward to work with. I don't think the machine itself would have fit between the table and the gallery, but you know, the way it was set up, the cone on it was set up on an arm, and you know, the arm would have come down, and it could have actually been setting at the head of the table.
And you could have extended the arm.
And the arm could, and we could do APs, you know.
Okay,
and,
so
yeah. And then
machine
the
past
laterals.
the head of the table, the arm could come down, so that should not have presented a problem.
It could have come down, and also could have come down here, and then the cone was in a
Yeah.
kind of,
Okay.
and so the cone, we could have moved the cone up to take a lateral.
That's, I think that's important.
And why do you think that's important?
Because they said the reason that the back part of the skull was cut off on the left lateral x-ray was because they could not fit the machine between the gallery and the table.
That's what Custer said.
Yes.
But, okay, well, he said that, but there is a photograph there is a photograph of the left side of the lateral side of it, where the telephone's on the wall. And if you'll notice in that photograph, you can see what supposedly is the edge of the gallery there. With the photographs, and I know that
Robert Groden?
Robert Groden, I know he's extensively looked at these and tested them, but some of them look like they're composites, you know. And like it seems like that where the body is doesn't quite correlate with the wall or with, you know, where other objects are. And one of the things that strikes me about the photographs is that if the photograph, I mean, we were taking the photographs, there should have been something else in the background in the pictures. There was a large autoclave next to the wall where the cold room was. That was at the end of the second table. And that never, you know, the other thing is the second table never appears. And at least if I remember correctly. standing at the head of the autopsy, you should have been able to see the deep sink, the wall cabinets, the overhead cabinets with glass. None of that is ever caught in any of the photographs.
So from like the top of the head where a picture has been taken and you can see that the wound has been extended here into the top, and you see his nose, you should be able to see the second table and the cabinets?
Oh, yeah, yeah, but you also notice that there is a dissecting table or tray that's sitting over some of those photographs, but there is no, there's no section, there's no Y section, there's no chest flap peel back, anything that would indicate that there would be a reason for that table there. And the table would not have been put there until after the Y incision was done, the rib cage was taken out. Then we would have set the table there, put the organs on it, and the table that we had a scale on the corner of it.
Good point.
Some of the other things, and this is probably not significant, it may just be my perception, but, I look at the nose structure, and then I look at another photograph that I know is the present, and I look at the ear structure. In some of those photographs, the structure of the ear looks almost the same as the structure from Bobby Kennedy in the pictures from him. The nose structure it seems to be wider and flatter when you're looking at it from this aspect. Again, too, is that I have no real basis to believe this.
One of the things that we have seen on the AP X-ray is that the nasal bones were fractured. The midline nasal bone, the vomer was fractured.
I saw that, but
And that could possibly make it appear different. There could have been a lot of bleeding into the tissue above and around the right ear. There was, I'm sure. Did you have a chance to see the X-rays themselves that night?
I saw some of the first ones. I didn't see the one. At that point in time, I basically could tell, could look at a chest X-ray or an extremity and get an idea of what was going on. As far as extensively being able to interpret an X-ray, I didn't have that ability.
Do you have any memory for how many X-rays they took of his head?
I remember the first series we took the laterals. We took photographs of the wounded, of the area at the top and back of the head, from this perspective. Took several of each of those, and then they took those out. They developed them, brought them back, walked in to the brain room. There were a couple of small viewing boxes there. Stuck them up on the viewing box. I did see those. Then wasn't showing anything, so Humes wanted them to do them again. We did the same thing. Did a little bit different angles on the head one, and so forth. And then came back virtually the same thing.
So you think you would have seen the AP view?
The initial ones. Yeah.
And you didn't see any bright white object?
No. After those two things and the discussions from the gallery and so forth, Dr. Humes asked Custer, I think it was, to bring in the resident or whomever was on duty at night. Dr. Eversole came in And then Dr. Eversole directed some things, and at that point in time, they did the head, they did a chest area, neck, and so forth, and some of those x-rays I understand have never been seen. And then when they came back, Dr. Eversole, Fink, Dr. Boswell, I think the two FBI agents who were in the background there. And then I'm not sure if Berkeley came, someone from the gallery came, and I assumed that was Berkeley. Went back to the back, and then a couple of other people from the gallery came and went back, and they were in the back. At that time, they had brought in a bank of X-ray viewing boxes, a portable thing. They had rolled it in and put it against the back wall, or against the front wall, I guess you would call it. And then they were all congregating back there. I didn't go back there because it was already crowded, and I'm sure they would have viewed that as I have no business being back here.
Well, my opinion of the original, the original x-rays that I saw were they were very good quality, very good detail. They were not as bright as far as the whiteness of the bone and metallic objects because of as compared to the computer enhanced House Select Committee x-rays. But they were good quality. There was no reason that, from my viewpoint, that they would have needed to develop these computer enhanced images.
I think that one of the things that, the autopsy was pretty much directed toward finding bullets, fragments, and so forth. Now, to me, that's paradoxical because the difference between the wounds from Parkland to Bethesda were extremely dramatic. Knowing what I saw from the brain and so forth, I had assumed that between Parkland and Bethesda at some time, the body had been examined.
Were you there when they did the scalp retraction photograph, pulling the scalp back to take the photograph inside?
Yeah, because I'm trying to think. The hand that you see here, I think that's Dr. Boswell. The hand that you see that has the real hairy arms, that was Hume's.
Okay.
And then Dr. Fink, in retrospect, Dr. Fink was there. I kind of feel like, and maybe in this is, like I said, it's in retrospect, that Fink wanted to do other things, but Hume's was overruling him. And because Hume's was the senior officer there, and he was the senior prosec.
Okay.
But I mean, the conflicts I saw were actually between Hume's and the gallery, Berkeley. Admiral Galloway was there. Didn't really participate whatsoever in any of the discussions with the autopsy team. The other two officers that were there actually didn't participate either. The only other time that there were people on the floor with us was not directly involved with the body, but there were a couple of people in suits that came out of the gallery and went back to view the x-rays with the other people. And I assumed that they were either FBI or Secret Service.
Okay.
And now I think they probably was Kellerman and maybe Greer or someone like that.
You remember Kellerman at the autopsy?
I remember a group of people in suits that they were dark suits, you know, and the suits were almost identical type. They were dressed identically. Now, because I remember that Seibert and O'Neill, who were the FBI agents that were standing behind Dr. Humes and then back from the autopsy table, they were dressed in suits, but it was like, you know, you and I dressed in a suit. They're different.
Do you remember if there was any video recording of autopsies, like considered?
We never, we never did anything like that the whole time I was there, and all the autopsies that we participated in. Now, with a caveat, we did autopsies at night. We did them with the residents. The residents were not particularly interested in the autopsies that we did, so a lot of times, specifically this one resident that, you know, we caught duty with quite frequently, or at least I did. He wanted you to go down, do the face sheet, open the body, tie off the brachials and so forth, take the body, organs out, put them on the cutting table, do the skull cap, and call him. So, you know, his name was Dickerson, I believe. And, you know, the other residents, they usually would show up and kind of stand back and view what we were doing, and then they would do the dissections. You know, we didn't sausage the heart there as we did in Philadelphia or in Mississippi. We actually just took scissors and went in and went through, and we could see the valves and so forth better that way.
Now, Dr. Chesser,
Yeah.
tell me give me your impressions of what you saw. Of course, we all know about the x-rays are probably composites, and what's your opinion on that?
Of course, I was able to compare what are labeled the originals with the House Select Committee computer enhanced images. To summarize, what I saw was, you know, I had a 2 times magnifying glass, and I had a little 5 times section there. So, but I went over every section of the skull, the outer, you know, the cortex, and on the right lateral, there was that thinning of the bone in the right frontal bone, which was lower than the left frontal bone. There was thinning, and there was a little gap. And on the inner side of that gap were multiple tiny metallic fragments. And if you were to follow that particle trail in the upper part of the skull, it would point directly to this area, okay? When I went to the AP to try to see if I could locate the hole, you know, that corresponding area up high, you're seeing the metallic particle trail, but you don't see any bone up in that area. They're just a little bit of fragments of bone toward the medial side. But there's no area where, you know, I think there's just so much bone, brain, tissue missing between the x-ray machine and the film. There's not enough to show up on the image.
So would you say that correlates with the drawing, the Ida-Docs drawing that's in the archives? As far as missing brain?
The brain? illustration?
Yes. Because you said there's only so much brain that can show.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, it doesn't correlate at all. And I strongly feel that that brain, the photographs of the brain at the archives are not his brain. We talk, you know.
Give me your impressions, why? Why, in your words, why do you think
The cerebellum is intact. There's not as much tissue missing as described by Mr. Jenkins, and there's not tissue missing in the back, in the occipital portion of the brain, as in the cerebellum, as described by the Parkland physicians. The brain to me looked like, you know, as Mr. Jenkins described, the left hemisphere, the brain is deformed. In the left hemisphere, looked like there was some flattening of the gyrus pattern, as if there's been pressure on it for a period of time, type of thing that I used to see when we'd have a brain in a formalin jar for a period of time, where things seemed to settle and compress. I don't believe it's his brain. Those are the...
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the brain that you saw, did it look like it had been in formalin for some time?
That was my impression when I looked at it. It's the type of appearance that I would see if the brain is settled in a jar. It's been sitting for a period of time.
Dr. Mantik, have you got any comment?
No, my recollection of the brain is too remote at this stage. It's like more than 20 years old. So the image that sticks in my mind is the public sketch of the brain that everyone can see. But as far as the photographs go...
You know, and that's another thing, that the sketch, the illustration doesn't correspond. It doesn't look just like what you see in the photograph.
Yeah, Mike has just been there recently,
Yeah.
so we have to go with his observations.
You said to me when you were looking at the photographs that you saw some sort of, and tell me if I've got this wrong, in the photograph you could see some sort of light source.
Oh, that was, okay, there were several of the photographs of the scalp retraction, you know, the mystery photo. And two of those, one of them was number 2. And I didn't write down the number of the other one, but they looked different than the other photographs. Seemed to be a light shining from the right side in areas that weren't lit up. You know, there was dim around portions, but this band of light coming across the photograph. And you can see sort of a shiny surface in portions. And then you had these little shadows. And when I had my magnifying glass and looked, it looked like little particles laying on top of the photograph that were casting, the flashlight was casting a shadow across the surface. And there were 2 of these. And they were clearly different than the other photographs.
Now, did you do stereo viewing with those apparent copies?
And I did not do stereo viewing
That would be
of
very
those 2.
interesting to do, wouldn't it?
I did not do that.
If they were copies, they might not project.
But
3D.
looking at them, you could tell there were particles laying on top of
So
a
that's
photograph that stood out. I didn't even need it for
That's
this.
another project to put on our to-do
Yes,
list.
yes.
So what does that mean, that there are particles that can be seen?
Well, here's the particles on top of the photograph. These are copies. These clearly appear to be copies to me. And as I understand it, all of the photographs that are in all the archives are supposed to be originals.
That is correct.
They're supposed to
They
be.
should not be
Yeah.
copies.
Yeah.
And one of the things with the brain is that by talking to you and your description of the brain, it kind of, well, actually, it gives me rationale for the brain that I saw, and it also gives me a high degree of reasoning to believe that the brain that I saw taken out of the skull that we handle same brain that you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Mhm.
Now, if we go back and we speculate a little bit, which I really feel uncomfortable about speculating about anything. In the brain room, there would have been brains from the autopsies that week
Mhm.
waiting for the brain conference on Monday. So theoretically, not theoretically, but in actuality, there would have been brains available
Yeah.
to substitute that. But then I go back and that would have been done in the morgue
Mhm.
after the body arrived. And unless there was a large portion of time when I had a mental
Yeah.
blank or so forth, I
You
would,
know.
now, one other
Yes,
point.
sir.
There is a testimony by Dr. Fang that says that he arrived after the brain was taken out of the cranium, and that it was laying on the side of the head by the cranium. I have to discount that because, it would have been difficult for someone that's almost standing at your shoulder, and then the other, Dr. Hume standing on the other side. It would have been difficult for me not to have noticed the brain being out of the cranium at that point in time, because it would have basically stood out. And there was no time from the time that the body was taken out of the casket that Paul and there was no time that I was outside the morgue. I was never allowed to leave the morgue. I spent the time the photographs, x-rays started, I spent until I took the brain, when Dr. Boswell and I took the brain over, he gave it to me and we infused it. That, and the time that I went and for the sandwich, that I was away from the table.
Now, I want to invoke this multiple casket entry scenario for a minute. At 7:17 or thereabouts, we have the story of the bronze casket from Parkland coming into the morgue. And then it comes back again at 8 o'clock. What were you doing between 7:17 and 8 o'clock?
That's not something that I believe happened. The first casket that came in was the transport casket or the shipping casket. It was the plane casket. That was the one that the body was taken out of. The next casket that came in was the bronze casket. And that casket came in on a dolly type thing and was pushed up against the coal room, the coal boxes. And then the third casket came in right around or after midnight, which was the big, heavy, ornate mahogany casket. It seemed to be larger than the one that was up against the coal room, much more elaborate. And that was the one that we actually put the body in.
After
And
you were all finished, you mean?
Yeah, after the mortician and so forth
Yes.
were finished. That body was, that casket was taken by the honor guard out of the morgue about relatively 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning.
So you don't remember any 8 o'clock casket entry?
No. Well, I think the honor guard, the one, if I understand what the honor guard is saying, the one that came in at the 8 o'clock entry was the bronze casket that was pushed up against the.
See, they have said that they left it at the door there in the hallway, and people came in and took it in from there. So.
Yeah, and the first class that I guess was supposed to supervise Paul and I was the laboratory's chief of the day, duty chief. And he initially went down to the morgue with Paul and I. He left, Paul and I started the labeling and so forth. And then he came in and he was in and out. And I saw them bring that casket in and push it against the wall, but at a distance. I mean, it was kind of it was a movement type thing, the same way as the scuffle in the gallery, that type. And I noticed that, and then I asked him, he came in again, I asked him, what the casket was, and he told me that it was Air Force Major that was to be buried in Arlington and had arrived too late to be admitted there, and that we were going to hold it in the morgue until Monday. We never did that before. It was unusual. And of course, what I was doing and the intensity, and I had to really pay attention to what Humes and them were saying, because when they asked me for something, I had to respond.
So as far as you're concerned then, once the body came out of the shipping casket and was placed on the table in the morgue, it was there all night long?
Yes, it was. It was there, and the only time that there was not somebody in the morgue other than Paula and I was when Dr. Boswell asked everybody to leave and thanked them for their help, and then he left and came back approximately 15 minutes later.
Well, what time of the night did this occur?
I have to rely on other people for times.
Are you talking about when?
When Boswell left the morgue?
I would say probably no more than 10 minutes after the body was put on the table.
Okay.
And he came back first. And I don't remember if anybody came in with him or not, but anyway, he came to the table and he told me, he says, okay, let's unwrap the body. And we unwrapped the body. He gave me the face sheet on the clipboard, and he started doing the scars, cut downs, that type of stuff that were visible on the thing. He was dictating to me measurements and so forth. And then after we finished with the measurements, he took the clipboard and he actually drew in the areas and put in some of the measurements that he had, just kind of ad-libbed in, and as you see it on the face sheet. Then during that period of time, Dr. Humes came back in, and there were people who came in and went into the gallery with him. And he came up and started unwrapping the head. And at that time, he was pretty much doing that on its own. And he unwrapped the head. Again, like I said, he took the sheet and he took the towel that was covering the head, the blood-soaked towel, and he threw them over against the wall. And my thought was, I got to clean that crap up. But anyway, and the X-ray people came in at that point in time, and the target people. And we started the x-rays and so forth. When the x-rays started, the people in the gallery and so forth, Paul and Dr. Boswell, I guess, were asked to leave, and I was given a lead apron, and I helped move the body around for placement of the cassettes and at the direction of Dr. Humes and so forth. The x-rays we did, I felt like were fairly standard type thing for gaping wound in the back of the head, that type. You take the film cassette and hold it against, and take we place the cassette underneath the head, underneath the shoulder area, by picking the body up, and then those were the x-rays that were taken originally. Whenever Saul came in, we did basically the same thing, except we set the body up and we took the chest area and again took the area of, the clavicle, shoulder, this area. And when Dr. Boswell and I were actually doing the initial U-shaped incision before we completed the Y, and we again rolled the chest flap up over, partially over the face, and took out the rib cage.
So the abdominal wall fat would have been.
Oh, it was
right
out.
there.
Yeah, it was out,
And that's what
we were looking at.
That's what we see in the scalp retraction photograph, is we can see that abdominal wall fat, and that tells us how the camera is oriented toward the skull, that you're looking from behind in that direction toward the foot, toward his feet.
Yeah.
Also, the camera was tilted a little to the right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then the discussion at the table was basically that that's a sloppy trick, and Dr. Boswell kind of lifted the fold in the flat, and looked up underneath and felt with his fingers, not very deep, and that was all we did with that, because I think at some point Dr. Boswell was told that's a trait, don't order that. I'm not sure whether that was Humes or someone at the gallery. But anyway, it was like the other wound that I saw on the side of the head.
Mm-hmm.
It was abandoned and never went back to.
One of the unusual things to me when I looked at the x-rays and the photographs was this kind of sawtooth pattern of the skull up here, that it just is very unusual. I think the HSCA said there was some beveling in one portion there, which I couldn't see on anything.
I apologize, because I wanted to bring two photographs. One of the photographs was, the one that everybody has trouble orientation. I've never been able to orientate, whether it's from the back, side, whatever.
That's the so-called mystery photograph.
Yeah.
Okay, but the other one is the one where the back of the head seems to be clean and so forth, and there's a flap that seems to be.
Yeah.
The bat wing flap, the
Yeah.
so-called bat wing.
I've been looking at it. I use magnifying glass too on my desk, but there seems to be, the flap seems to come up, and then the outer edge of the flap is like this, but there seems to be kind of an indentation in the middle of the flap. It looks like that on the margins of that indentation there is a cupping and on the interior of it. if I could see a true lateral with it projected, then I could determine if it was put back where.
There wasn't a true lateral photograph
Right, no, it
that
wasn't.
included forehead all the way to the back of the head.
Right.
And none of the photographs is that seen,
But if I
except on the left side.
Yeah.
On the right side, you don't see that.
if I look, I mean, if I imagine how the placement back into the skull, that indentation seems to be in the general area where I saw the one. Now, if we could see that side, we could see if it was the other portion
Mhm.
that was completed, and the beveling would have been on the interior of the skull. So
You talk about here at the,
Yeah.
above, just above and interior to the ear.
Right.
That's where I saw an oval reddish area, and I think that's where that's where you said you saw some gray margins, but I couldn't, it was an oval reddish area that appeared sunken, okay? So it wasn't like the rest of the scalp in that region, but it was just the same location. It was above and interior to the ear.
And this flap doesn't show, I mean, it shows just a very small portion of the margin that would make a complete whole type thing. And like I said, if we had the ability to fold that back in and look at a lateral, that might be true. But the other thing that it would prove is with the shelving, we always call it cupping, but with the cupping on the interior, it would have been an indication of an injury.
Yeah.
So,
I was surprised. I thought the autopsy photographs would be very clear and focused, and they were not. To me, most of them were just a little bit blurry. Do you remember that, David?
you know, and we go back and we think of who took those.
Mhm.
You know, the people who took those were proficient people, especially Stringer. I mean,
Stringer had been called one of the best autopsy photographers in the world.
These were not, most of them were indistinct, just a little bit blurry, and I was disappointed. But I think that means something too.
Maybe you were supposed to be disappointed.
Yeah.
yeah. But again, I would love to be able to see those, but
We're gonna work on that.
That's what,
I'm not sure that's possible.
It's just a mystery to me why the access is still limited like that.
And it may just be skepticism on my part, but I think it was the purpose of it was that the initial 75 years, there was no one in that morgue that night that was going to live 75 years more
Yeah.
and be cognizant.
Yeah.
And I think that's the purpose.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Record Review Board came along, but they still maintained, even though supposedly all this was open to the public, they still maintained the control over that
Yeah.
aspect of the.
You know, supposedly this is still strictly, according to the Kennedy family attorney, one of my requests was to go back and look at certain x-rays again. Yes, after I went in April, I asked to go back and look at the x-rays again because my time was limited. Most of my time was spent looking at the HSCA images, and then I found out they weren't the originals, and then I didn't have much time to look at the originals. And so I asked him if I could go back again, and former Senator Kirk then consulted with NARA, who determined that, he said they had determined that I'd had sufficient time to view the images. So it's not strictly, I don't believe it's strictly in his power to do this. I think there's things we don't know about how access is granted. I then went back and I explained that I requested permission to see the photographs, and since I wasn't able to look at the x-rays again, I looked at only the scalp retraction photograph the first time, so he allowed me to go back and look at all the cranial photographs. As they were going through the photographs, I wanted to stand over and, as they were looking through them, but the NARA personnel would not allow me to do that. They took the one of the upper back wound, included the back of the head, but I was not allowed to view that one. So it's the whole story that is strictly according to the Kennedy family attorney, I don't think is quite entirely true.
Well, that tells us that there's a story there in and of itself.
One of the things I think that I'm going to attempt to do is, we have a representative, Sessions, and he's fairly amenable to, we're talking with the people and attempting to use his influence and so forth to make things happen. But in this administration, he's kind of an adversarial individual, so I'm not sure how much he seems to feel like that when he requests something, even though it may be minor or reasonable, it's denied because it may sequester disapproval from such and such. And I've talked to him about other things, and that's kind of where it came from.
What bothers me also is that these x-rays that are available on the internet and the copies that were released by NARA years ago are supposed to give a true representation of the actual original x-rays, but they're not the exact same. The 6.5 millimeter supposed bullet on the AP film looks totally different on the original, and you can see its artificial nature on the original, and this frontal defect where I think there's an injury is not seen on the copy. It's filled in.
Right?
It's filled in on the copy. So I think that's very, that's the images that are released are not true, and the official reason is that we don't want to cause further emotional damage or grief to the Kennedy family by releasing these things. But this would not be any, that just doesn't seem legitimate to me in this situation.
Well, I think that there are a lot of that. Why weren't the photographs available at the Warren Commission? And the reasoning was, well, if we do that, they have to be made public, and the sensitivity to the Kennedy family has to be maintained, and that type of garbage. That doesn't make any sense either, because everyone knew that eventually something was going to be out there. And
if that were the case, why was James Fox allowed to sell those photographs, which were very graphic and horrible to look at? Why was he allowed to do that? I mean, and those images are not the same either, because we talked about, the scalp retraction. They're cropped where you really have difficulty orienting yourself. So
I think that's
a very big deception.
Leak a little to the public to try to satisfy?
Well,
the
there's
man?
no anatomical marks that I can
Yeah.
see, and on the photographs that will orientate, you know, I have difficulty with that as to whether it is taken from the rear, front, if it's taken from an oblique angle in the back, or if it's taken from straight down.
I can show you where, you know, if I'll have someone sit in the chair, I can show you how I think it's oriented. Or
One of you was
David, you
shorter
want
hair.
to? Or you want me to sit here and you can demonstrate it?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So, I think the camera was here, okay? And rather than being straight on, it was rotated to the right. And so you're looking into the skull, you see the margin of this is the back of the head,
Okay.
okay? And the limit of the photograph is here. So you see the forehead on the right. Actually, it was more centered on the right side of the skull, across a little bit. You can see back this way, the fat pad is extending out, and you can see the fat pad. You can see the eyebrow, eyelashes over here. And Dr. Mantik also saw a chest wall nipple, okay? And this is the orientation. It's right here.
Okay.
Turn to the right. These
Okay.
fragments, this hole is from the skull. When Dr. Hume said when he pulled the scalp back, the dura and the scalp and the fragments collapsed into the cranial vault. So that means they fell, and you're seeing it layered in the posterior fossa. That's why it's hard making sense of it, because you're thinking that hole in the bone, in those bone fragments, you're looking at the skull. Okay, but you're looking inside the skull. They've collapsed into the skull, those fragments.
Okay.
Do you agree with that, David?
I mean,
Most likely.
that was one of the reasons, what I wanted to do today was to ask. In the photograph, and it seems like that in this area, there's a protrusion that looks like a hood type thing with a hole.
Well,
Now-
you may be seeing the
Here?
the petrous ridge, but
Yeah.
here, you're not gonna see the bone here. You're inside the skull, you're not gonna see bone, because this is dura,
Okay. And
lining the base of the skull, okay? And
right,
And right here is where the bone fragments and dura from back here, when they pulled the scalp back, it fell and collapsed in place. The bone fragments fell with the dura and it's laying right here, and I think you're seeing it in the posterior fossa.
Okay, so, I mean, with the foramen here, which is
Mhm.
actually the back of, or the bottom of the skull where the
Well,
spine.
I think the limit of the photograph is you're catching it here, and it's sort of angled this way, okay?
So we're not going.
But you can see the outline of the occipital skull. You can see the outline up to here, and then it gets, let's see, then you're catching the forehead scalp, and this is all pulled back, and then the forehead, then you're seeing the eyebrow, eyelashes bulging out up here, and then the fat layers is this way.
Okay, so we're not really picking up any of the sphenoid wings here.
I think the photograph intercranially extends into the middle fossa,
Okay,
but yeah, you're not picking up the
Okay.
lesser wing or anything like that.
because one of the things I was concerned about, if actually this hooded type thing was the little, or for lack of a better, the sac that the internal ear organs, but that would have had to put it back up here.
The internal ear organs, they're deep in the bone here.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the ridge, it's the petrous ridge. I think that's what you're describing, is that petrous ridge, which is the skull base.
Because that was what I always had a question in my mind, as if that was what there actually was.
Yeah.
And since the dura was here, then that may well be.
And so it's focused on, the photograph is focused on this hole surrounded by the fragments. So there's a hole in the dura in these fragments surrounding
Okay,
it. So
right.
it's focused on that.
Okay.
And they're radial, they're sort of lines, look like it could be radial fractures. So if you were to pull that up, it would be somewhere in the right occipital
Right.
region. But the original location was back here somewhere, and it collapsed like this. So it went from like this,
Okay.
fell flat, and it's laying flat
In-
within the skull.
Yeah, that's, okay, that gives me a better perspective. And
I could actually
now,
pull the photograph up in my phone.
yeah, now I know why I couldn't orientate the bone structure per se. But also the other thing with this thing, there is an area in here in the scalp that looks like surgical incision that created a V. Now,
Up.
That's
high.
on the forehead.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah. But now up here on there, you know, there's an area here that looks like it could be.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, okay. And this area here.
Up here. Can you, yesterday,
Yeah, they
asked
asked,
my wife,
yeah,
okay.
I can.
Yesterday pointed out that V. I think you can see the V incision up here, okay? You can make it out, and the very, here, see the eyebrows.
Okay.
Eyebrow.
Yeah. that
And
would
on
be-
the color photograph, besides the eyebrow, you can see the eyelashes
Oh,
projecting. And I can see the eyelid and the eyelashes projecting
Okay.
even out further from there.
Now, this is the area that I was describing here. The other thing was this area
So
here.
actually, this is more the correct orientation is direct
Okay.
along the sagittal line.
Right, okay. See, because I think the impression is, and my first impression was, that this, where the scalp is
Yeah.
folded back, that was the sagittal line.
Now, this is, because it has to be, if you notice the curve of the skull here, you've got right frontal, temporal coming back. This
Okay,
is the level of the ear. This is the level of the back of the head, okay? So the only way to explain it, especially with the location of eyebrows, eyelashes, the fat pad, the only way to explain it is this orientation where
Okay.
this is the midline.
Okay.
And if you look at this,
Yeah, this is
this
right.
complex, I call it the dural fragment complex.
Okay, so that's.
It's fallen, the dura has collapsed into the posterior fossa.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Okay?
Okay.
And this is what I thought was so unusual, this sawtooth pattern.
This is, supposedly this is an indication of an exit wound here.
Yes.
And then there's also a little here.
There's, yeah.
In that area, and if it's orientated, I mean, if the orientation is where the sagittal suture is running here, this is actually more toward this area.
Yes, it's this, so
Yeah.
now you're looking at parietal occipital
Right.
instead of temporal,
Yeah,
frontal,
so
parietal.
But, I mean, in temporal, in that orientation, temporal would be
Oh, yeah, it's,
more there.
so it's actually, yeah, it's more parietal occipital, temporal, in
Right,
this area,
in here.
extending, yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, that make, and then the occipital, or the protuberance would be.
The occipital protuberance would be
okay,
right back
there.
here.
And this-
And I agree with Dr. Mantik that this outline here suggests that's where the Harper fragment came from. And it crosses the midline over to the left side of the skull.
Okay, because the fragments that we had were being, they were trying to fit those.
Trying to fit them into this,
in
okay.
that area. that was probably, and this, when I first looked at this, I felt like that was pretty much a separation after the fracture lines were extended and so forth, and that this was peeled back in order to actually photograph.
Actually, I think that, is this what you're talking about, that
That's a
ridge?
Yeah, no, this is a finger of a glove.
See this,
And then there's another one up here that's kind of, and see, that's a hand that's actually opening the,
let's see.
you can see here, there's a finger bent this way, and then there's a finger on the other side. And
See, what I interpret this is okay, you've had fractures in there, folding back the skin, and scalp, you're catching, let's see, it's folded back over, this is the rim of the skull here because of the fracture line. You've got fragments that are missing there. Now, so the thing is, you never have any photograph that it has the entire skull.
yeah,
Okay? And you've got this marker that's obscuring
and
part of the picture. You've got this marker, and
And
you can't tell what's going on with the skull in the right occipital region. All the way over, you can see part of the right occipital region, but
you have no markings on this
no,
ruler, measurements.
yeah,
And actually, I think that this is being used to
cover up.
cover up some
Yeah.
of this area down here. But on some of the enhanced photographs I have, you can see this is a latex glove with a hand. And then there is another one in this area up here, this one.
Yeah,
You know.
the best at the archives, one of the best photograph for me were the two color photographs. It seems like I can
Yeah.
see better detail on those.
But I think that's one of the things I had, when I first started listening to Dr. Mantik and so forth, I had assumed that the photograph that had the large bullet or fragment in it was actually taken from, it was not an AP, it was a PA. But then I began to look at actually the
Yeah.
nasal.
They were,
Yeah.
instead of straight on, they were
Yeah.
aiming up, and
Right,
Yeah.
it was like this.
yeah, it was,
And it was almost like it was purposely, the way it was taken was purposely taken to give the impression that there was a major portion of the frontal lobe missing, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, with an x-ray, you see all the way through. And then, after listening to Dr. Mantik and so forth, and knowing that we did not find any fragments that were that large, or anything that was significant that they could be related back to a bullet, it didn't make any sense to me. And then, I
yeah.
focused in on
When you're
your
looking at
findings and,
when you're looking at things like this, it's always the hardest, most difficult for the first person to look at the evidence. Dr. Mantik, I just have tremendous respect for what he's done. So and then it's easier for me to go in and confirm or disagree and confirm, what he's saying. And then every person that subsequently comes along, if they're going to give an honest opinion, they pick up more additional evidence. I think the more physicians, the more individuals we have looking at the
Yes,
evidence.
we'd like lots to do it.
oh, it's so much.
Like for
I-
Dr. Salyer to go there.
It's, oh, there's so much, Dr. Mantik tried to give me a list of things to document.
But it was too long.
It was, well, and I think you would need 3 to 4 days.
Yes, which is
To
what
do it,
I
and-
had when I went.
And I'm accustomed to looking at X-ray, 3 or 4 minutes, and I've seen everything. This is, when you've got alteration, which, it just compounds the difficulty in reviewing this. And there's so much material to look at, you cannot possibly do it in one day. I had set aside most of the day. My wife was with me, and I wasn't able to stay all the way till 5 o'clock. I had to leave about, I can't remember, 2:30 or something. We had to catch a ride back in. And so I only had like an hour and a half to look at the originals after looking at the House Select Committee X-rays all day. And I really thought that I'd probably be allowed to come back and look at them again. I wasn't. I was pretty naive. I wish I could go back.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot, having followed in Dr. Mantik's footsteps.
Yeah.
Do you agree with him that the X-rays we have in the archives are composites?
Yes, I do. I completely agree with him.
Yeah.
I agree with all of his conclusions.
That says a lot.
Yeah, the thing that's important to me about both your work and your work is that it's confirmation for what I've seen in the past, or what I've said in the past, that was kind of juxtapositional from other people. And and being the only person who's actually been saying these things, I felt after I described the brain and made the statement about it, I had the impression that it was a female brain. That was just, and that was
And
a
it
true,
could be. Yeah, I
that
don't
was
know.
a true fleeting type
I don't
thing.
know.
And then I knew that, and I even went, after I made the statement, I felt foolish about it, because everything else was so clear, reasonable. I remembered it. And then, I felt like, well, for making that statement, which really was not significant to anyone but me, I jeopardized the credibility of everything else that I said. And so I actually went to the literature, did searches to see if there was, a difference that you could visually detect.
On gross appearance,
Yeah.
maybe there is, but it would be
I-
very, very minute. I'm trying to think of what it could be.
I'm not
The-
sure. Whatever.
I think could be in the size of the gyral pattern in the parietal lobe, maybe
Yeah.
larger in men because of different factors. But I don't think you could tell in any individual
Yeah.
brain if it was female or male. I'm not aware of
I
that.
think we can
And
walk
actually,
this
that
out.
was just something that kind of popped into
Thanks for
my
bringing
head
that
as
to-
I saw the brain.
Yeah, no problem.
But now, talking with you, and what I hoped to accomplish, I did, was a confirmation that what the brain that you saw and the brain that I saw, I believe they were the same brain. And if that's the case, then the brain that we removed at autopsy was not.
Yeah,
Make sure Dr. Mantik gets
Repressed.
one bar.
and that explains why it was so easy to remove.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
it
Oh,
does.
Yeah, yeah.
And it also explains why,
Okay.
why there wasn't, why the meninges were not more prominent as,
Yeah.
and a part of.
That's a good point.
Still a
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
the skull as you would normally have seen it. So,
Okay, I think we're
We're
about out of
finished.
time. so-
Okay.
well,
Thank you. It's been a real
You know,
privilege and pleasure
I
for me
thank
to
you.
talk with you.